Hi, it's Dan Redding from 2-Bit Circus Foundation, and I want to continue the conversation we were having about the new Bambu P1S printers, and I want to get us slicing a file and printing something on that printer. First thing we'll need to do is install Bambu Studio. That's where we'll be doing our slicing and file preparation. First thing I'll need to do is go open my web browser. Got one right here, and I'm going to search for Bambu Studio. Comes up right here. In case the link changes or something, I'll put a link in the chat as well, but this is how I usually go and find it. I'm on a Windows machine, so I'll need to install it here. This Bambu Studio app will only work on Windows or Mac. There is an app that works on the phone, but unfortunately, at least for LAUSD, we won't be able to get those printers on the Wi-Fi, so that means we won't be able to use the app for them. We'll need to use the Bambu Studio, and that gets installed on a desktop. I'm going to go ahead and click download, and it's a pretty large file, so it'll probably take a minute to download. Mine takes about 50 seconds, and it's about 206 megabytes. Fortunately, I've already gotten one downloaded, so we don't have to wait for it right now. I'm going to open up that file, see where it is. It pops open into my download folder, and I can run the software from there. It might be that you don't have permissions to install something on your computer. In that case, you might need to ask an IT person to approve that with an admin account. We've found that most people are able to install it successfully and aren't hung up on that step. I'll go ahead and double click it and start it off. Perfect. This is the user account control. I'll typically get this question. This is good. Make sure I don't get anything installed that isn't supposed to be. I'll click yes to tell my computer that yes, this is safe. I'd like Bambu to install Studio. I'll only see this on Windows machines. On an Apple machine, you'll need to drag that file over from one side to the other. That'll put it right into your programs and files. Okay, welcome. I'm going to go ahead and click next. This is asking about the license agreement. You're free to read it, of course. I'll just click agree in this case. It asks for a destination folder. I'm going to go ahead and push install in that location. I do want to make sure I have enough space for it, but unless you have your hard drive completely full, you should be okay. I'll hit install. The next couple prompts that will come up can be a little confusing to people, and that's partially why I'm going to be making this video. I want you to kind of know what it looks like to install, what things to select, and if you select the wrong buttons, you can end up with some issues going forward trying to use the slicer. Not that you'll have issues, more that you might just be confused with too many options. And I want you to get off the ground and running quickly instead of feeling like you're stuck or confused and you don't know what to happen next. Looks like our install is done. Saw it pop up on my desktop over here. Very exciting. I'll go ahead and push next. It's asking me if I want to associate files with my newly installed Bambu Studio. I'll push yes unless I have some other 3D modeling software that I use, like Fusion 360 or Blender or something that I'm using 3D files for. If you don't do any of those things, it's okay to associate those files with it. The big three files that we'll often see are .3mf files, .stl files, and .step or .stp files. And those are what constitutes a 3D model that our computer will take and then slice. I'll say, go ahead, associate those to my computer. Perfect. Welcome to Bambu Studio. It's going to help us get things set up in several steps. It's going to ask me my local region. I'm in Los Angeles, so I'm going to click North America. It's going to ask us to join the program to help everyone print. I usually do. If you're at LAUSD, it might be that this information is blocked anyway, but you can go ahead and choose skip or to join depending on your comfortability. Now, this video is set up specifically for teachers at LAUSD, or Los Angeles Unified School District, and the printers that we have there. So this is asking us, which printers will you have? The printer that you'll be getting is the Bambu P1S. It's also asking us what nozzle we'll have. So what I like to do on this screen is I push clear all, and everything else will be cleared. Sometimes people only see that there's 3 printers here, but there's actually, 7. So there's a lot more if you scroll down, and it's also going to have a lot of printers from other companies in here in case you want to use those printers in this program. If you have other 3D printers at your school, you can go ahead and click them, and you can slice files for those printers within Bambu Studio. For us though, we're just going to go back up to the top and we're going to find where it says Bambulab P1S, and we're going to only select the 0.4 millimeter nozzle. If you'd like, you can always purchase additional nozzles from Bambu or other places online. Those will affect the slicing that you'll be doing. The one that comes on is the 0.4 nozzle, and it's a great general nozzle for certainly for PLA, the material that we'll often use, and for most materials that don't have really hard aggregates inside of them. We'll select the 0.4 millimeter nozzle for the Bambulab P1S and leave all the rest of the checkboxes unchecked. Next, it's going to ask us what filaments would we like to have as an option. Now, you can print whatever filament you want with your printer, of course. I recommend sticking with PLA though, because it's much easier and it has the least amount of fumes of any of the other printers. So it's a great one to print around children and in schools. So what I like to do here again is I push clear all, and within it I'm going to go find Bambu PLA Basic, which is right here, and that's really the only one that I'm going to need to have installed. I don't need to go and uncheck all of these at the top. That's totally fine, but down here I'm just going to push my clear all, and then I'm going to only select Bambu PLA Basic. If you'd like, and if you have other kinds of PLA that you have, maybe the glow in the dark or marble or matte, you can add those in, but the settings are so close to the same that it doesn't really matter that much. And I find that only having one option for the filament simplifies a lot of the slicing processes. So I'll just go ahead and select this one by itself. It's also going to ask me if I want to install the Bambu Network plugin. Now, if you're at LAUSD, the network plugins won't work because the printers can't connect to the network. However, that won't necessarily always be true. Bambu is updating their printers and their software, and we're working on getting some of the connections for the printers approved by the district so they will work. I recommend installing it, but it won't help us very much in this case. So I'll leave the check mark checked, and then I'll push finish. Cool, now that we're ready, we have our software installed. I'll push close. All right, when we first open up Bambu Studio, it'll typically take us into the home screen right here, and it'll give us some online models to try to get us to click on those. I usually don't use the Bambu Studio to find my 3D models. I find that finding them on printables.com or other locations is actually much better. We'll mostly be using Bambu Studio for the slicing requirements. I'm going to go over into my Prepare tab at the top. This is where I'm going to be loading in any 3D models and start to work on them or prepare them for the slicing process. In order to practice on the Prepare tab, we'll have to get a 3D model for us to find. I recommend a very simple one for your first print, and the best place to find models is printables.com. I'll go ahead and open my browser, and I'm going to search for printables.com, or just type it in. And when I'm there, there's all sorts of cool models on this website. You can go to 3D models and take a look through some of the ones that are most downloaded, or even some of the ones that are currently trending or most liked of all time. I also like to go over on the left side here and take a look at where it says learning. There's some really cool learning related models, and again you can search through those and sort by different styles as well. Cool cable management, 3D models, parts of the brain, all sorts of cool ones for almost any possible age group that you might be teaching. That's a great place. However, we're not going to be doing any of these complicated ones yet. We're going to do a first model, and the one that I like to do is the Calicat version 2 or V2. Looks like this, and I'm going to click it, and I'm going to grab this model. I'm going to go over to this big orange bar, click download. Now that won't actually download the files. That'll just take me to the options where the downloads are. There's two versions of this, Calicat version 2 fillets.stl and Calicat version 2.stl. The fillets has rounded corners instead of sharp corners, and I like that one a little better, so I'll go ahead and click download. These files are pretty small, so it'll usually go really quick when it's downloading. Now I'm going to go back to my slicer, and I need to go bring that 3D model into my program so that I can continue using it. I like to do it with this little add button at the very top of my toolbars. It says add. I'm going to go over to my downloads button, and today it looks like I've got my Calicat version 2 fillets. I can click it. I can also just click and drag that file right onto the screen if I'm more comfortable with that. Now I've got my cute little Calicat all ready to go, and it's sitting on this big build plate. This build plate will look exactly like the build plate that you have in your 3D printer. And the reason for that is on purpose. Helps you get like a visual representation of how big the model is relative to the real world. So I can see, oh, if I hold that build plate in my hand, that's how big the cat will be. Now, I'm moving the build plate around. I'm just clicking and holding in the space. I can even look underneath at different sides, and this is really helpful. When I'm using my mouse, I can push the mouse wheel down, and I can do some panning to look. Sometimes that is going to be useful, depending on if you want to check out a model or see what's going on. Now this, of course, is just a 3D model. We can't actually print it yet. We have to do some work on it, mostly related to slicing. Over on the left side here, where it gives me my printer, I want to make sure that it says Bambulab P1S 0.4 nozzle. If I click on it, I probably should have all the other ones removed because we didn't add those on the install process. I should just see this one. If you see the other ones, that's fine. It won't hurt anything. We just want to make sure that we have the one that we actually have at our school selected so we can use it. Perfect. It's going to ask us for the textured PEI plate. That's what these printers come with, unless you've purchased a separate PEI plate or something. That's the perfect one to use. There are some other plates you can use depending on what kind of fancy materials you're using, but I don't think you'll need any of those, especially not if you're only printing in PLA. Now where it says filament, it says there's a little number 1 that's black. This would be if I'm only using the spool holder on the back of the printer. We're typically not using that. I encourage you to use that AMS, which is the big clear plastic cover that goes on top of the printer instead. That has 4 spaces for filament. So in order to represent that in our software, I'm going to click over where it says filament, and I'm going to push this plus button where it says add 1 filament. I'm going to push +1, 2, 3. Now I have 4 total because I added 3 to 1, and this will represent the 4 different spools of filament that I have loaded into the printer. It goes from the left to the right, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4 for each of the spools. So if I want to print whatever in spool number 1, I can say number 1 right here will be printing. Maybe I have black in number 1, and then this cat will print black because I've defined that to be the case. However, remember, I'm not actually setting the color of the plastic in here. I'm only telling it which of the slots to print from. My software can only choose a plastic, not magically change the color of it. So if I actually have a green plastic in number 1, I'm going to click where it says number 1 on the green, and I'm going to set it to green. That will change the cat now to show as green so it can more closely represent what it will be in the real world. I like to set this so that it matches what my printer is, but as you change out the spools, sometimes it might get disconnected or it might not be the same as it was before. That's fine, as long as you remember that the files we make don't define the color, it only defines what slot it uses in our AMS. So in this case, I'm going to set mine to black because I do actually have black filament loaded into my slot 1 for the P1S. Next up, it's going to ask us a couple other things. Probably started on quality over here. I'll move it back to there. We are going to leave it at the 0.2 millimeters standard for the layer size. That is how thick each of the layers is as it builds up. You can increase the layer size, usually up to about 0.4 or maybe 0.28, looks like the highest. The thicker layers will make it print faster, but you'll lose resolution. You can also go down to even smaller 0.8 millimeters, which is like, almost a third of 0.2. But that means it'll take at least 3 times as long to print that, though you will get a lot more detail when you're printing it. I recommend leaving it just the standard because for most things, it'll be totally fine to use this. We'll leave our layer height as 0.2, initial height as 0.2, and the rest of the things we're not even going to touch. There's very few settings in here you'll want to mess with until you get a lot more savvy at printing. Then you might find that there are some settings that you want to try, or if you're printing a part that's going to need to be much stronger or something like that. If I go over to strength, this is where I could change some of the strength settings of my model. But for our first initial one, we're just going to leave it just as is. Leave my 2 wall loops here, and I'll leave all of my top, bottom shells and my infill to be the same. This sparse infill density means what percentage of plastic is the inside of the piece going to be filled with. We typically do not fill the piece completely with plastic because it would be a huge waste, and there's not really a lot of extra strength you get from it. So instead it's only 15%, and it's filled in these different patterns. I usually leave it as grid as a pattern. That's a great starting one. Rectilinear is another commonly used one. I also will use adaptive cubic, which is nice, but for the most part, grid or rectilinear are perfectly fine. I'll leave mine on grid just so that we can keep it simple. Support, we'll leave our support off for now. That'll be in one of our more advanced slicing tutorials later. We'll talk about support and why it is. I'll probably talk a little bit about it at the end. Cool. One last thing is, in case I want to print this using one of the other spools that are in my AMS, maybe I want to go to slot 2 or 3 or 4, what I do is I can click on my little cat here, and I can push the number 2 on my keyboard. That'll change it to slot number 2, slot number 3, or 4. Remember, it's not the color, it's the slot that's actually in the AMS. I'm going to click, I'm going to tap number 1 again to get back to what my AMS is in number 1. I can do a little bit of manipulation now with my model before I do the slicing. I can drag it around the build plate, put it in different spaces. I can also make it bigger or smaller. I can, if I want to do that, I'll click up on the top where it says scale, click that, and maybe I want to make this 200% from 100. That'll double all the X, Y, and Z dimensions. So remember, if you're doubling an X, Y, and Z dimensions, you're actually changing the volume by a factor of 8, because volumetric is cubed relationship to the single dimensions on each side. So that means it'll take 8 times as long to print. So that's a giant waste of plastic that'll take a long time, and our cat is a monster. I'll instead change this to 50%. If I change any of them, X, Y, or Z, to 50, they'll all change to 50 because I have it set as uniform scale. Now I have a nice, cute little cat, which is nice. If I wanted to make my another cat, maybe I have 2 favorite students that I want to give this to, I can click on it, right-click on it, and I'm going to push clone. I'm going to say clone this cat once, boom. Now I've got 2 little cats. Maybe I want more than 2, so I'm going to click here for clone, and this time I'm going to choose 5. I'd like 5 additional copies, which will bring me up to a total of 7. Awesome. I have a whole set of them. If I don't really like how they're arranged on here, I can always move them around on the build plate so that maybe I need to have them in a different particular orientation. But the more space I have between my models means that the print head has to move farther, so it'll actually take longer for it to print all the way up there. So instead, I'd rather have them closer, and I'll let the printer kind of choose that. I'm going to click right here where it says Arrange All Objects, and then I'll click Arrange, and it's going to move all the cats as close to the center and as close as possible as it likes for the models. Nice, much better. I can also make as large of a cat army as I possibly can. Let's right click on it, and I'm going to push Fill the Bed with Copies. Boom. Now I have all sorts of cats. Way too many, I think. And it looks like I need to rearrange this. I'm going to click on it, push Arrange, and it's going to try to put them in the space as best as it can. It does have to do a lot of math here, so you can see that I've got the little thinking and spinning wheel as my computer does some processing. Oh, this is taking quite a long time, actually, for it to decide the best possible orientation for cats. All right, that took quite a long time, and it decided that it actually couldn't fit them all on this build plate. It moved a lot of them over to a second build plate. I certainly don't want to do that. In the event that you have a big project, you can also make more of these virtual build plates, change which one you have selected, which one we want to send to the printer, and it's good for like building out a whole project so that you know what is printing when, and you can like send different build plates to be printed. I'm going to click the little X on the virtual build plate to close it off. Oop, got all my little cats floating out there. I'm going to just select all my cats with Control A, delete it, And then I'm going to start fresh again with one cat because I kind of wrecked my build plate there by playing too much. I normally don't use that fill bed with copies. It is a little bit ridiculous in my opinion. All right, I'm going to scale this back down to 50%. No, actually I'm not. All right, let's take a look and let's click slice. Now to do this, I'm just going to go up to the top and I'm going to push slice. Now what that does is it takes me over into the preview panel, and it also is going to change the color of my cat. If yours didn't change the color, you might want to go over to here where it says color scheme, and I like to click line type. That'll tell me what each of these lines is and why it's doing that way. Orange is an outer wall, so I can see that's like the outer wall of the outside of a piece. And I also have this red color that's going to represent this top surface. So you can see I do have some top surfaces as well. Now over here on the right, I have this big green line. That's like a sliding bar, and I can actually slide it down from the top, and I can do a little bit of X-ray on the cat and see what's going on in these different layers. So notice when I have the cat's little brain case lifted off, I can see that inside it, it's almost completely hollow. There just has some lines going across to add a little bit of diagonal supports to help the cat keep its structure. There's also this yellow one, which is an inner wall. Remember, we had a setting that said how many walls do you want? This one has 2 walls, 1, 2 here, and that's the total. This is a great way to go in and check a model and see if it's going to have any issues, or if you do try printing a model and you have issues, this is a good way to see what might have gone wrong. I also like to look over here on the total estimation. It says, how much filament is this going to use? 6.44 grams. How long is this going to take? 21 minutes. It's only actually going to take 16 minutes to print, but it takes 5 minutes and 45 seconds to prepare, or 5 minutes and 46 seconds to prepare. That means it'll run a little bed leveling test every single time, and I highly recommend that you do that. It seems a little silly to have, a quarter of our time in the preparation phase, but it's totally worth it to make sure that your prints go without a hitch and are much more successful that way. Cool. Now, once we're ready, we can actually take this cat and we can print it. Now, normally you can just print this file through the cloud or through your network and send it to your printer, but unfortunately we won't be able to do that in this case because the printers that we have aren't able to go onto the Wi-Fi network. So when we're ready to print it, we like it, we know that it's going to the right file. Up here, I can't click print plate in the upper right. Instead, I have to change this to a different option. I'll click the little arrow and I'll click export plate sliced file, just like that. Then I can click export plate sliced file. But before I do that, I really have to go get the SD card from my printer. The SD card is located up at the upper left side, right behind the screen. Lots of times it comes with a little piece of tape over it, so you'll want to peel that off, and then carefully kind of push it down a little bit, and it'll pop up right into your fingers. Go ahead and take that, and then you'll need to put it into a dongle or an SD card reader of some kind so you can put it into your computer. Once you do that, it'll pop up onto your computer, and then you'll be able to save it. I'll pop mine in right now. Mine does say there's an error with the drive. I'll just ignore that. I'll say continue without scanning. And it opens up just like this. It's going to be my USB drive G. Now I'll be able to click export plate sliced file, and I'll be able to click my USB drive G and save it right into here. With that, I don't actually have to save it into any of the folders if I don't want to. They'll all pop up in the same exact spot. I do like to add a little label onto the file, so I'm going to put Dan's Calicat version 2. This might be a good place to name it for students or after particular dates, because you'll start to see them all kind of pile up in a giant blob, and you can always go back and delete them later, but sometimes it makes it a little easier to find when you rename them this way. I'll go ahead and push save. Now I'm good to go. Now I'm going to take my SD card out of my computer and I'm going to put it back into the Bambulab P1S. Once it's in, I can scroll down using the little wheel down to the picture that looks like a file. If I push the OK button on that, and then I can scroll to find the file that I just saved. Once I do, I can push OK. It'll open the file. It will ask me, is this the right file that I'd like to print? And then I can push OK and it will start printing. That's great. I can go ahead and watch it as it's getting started. Lots of times it'll have to heat up for a minute as it's printing, and there we go. When it's finished printing, I can open up the window of the printer and I can pull out the whole build plate. That makes it easier to take the models off. I can also bend the build plate just a bit in order to pop the model off. Now the cat here is going to pop off really easily no matter what. But it's kind of nice to know that this can come off the plate, and I can do a little bit of bending to make sure that it stays useful and to make sure that the parts come off easily. Once I'm done, I'll have to slide the plate back in, and I want to carefully align it with the two gray tabs in the back, and I want to make sure the plate isn't off-centered in either direction. If it is, the printer will not like that, and it'll fail for next time. Now that we've got our CalCat printed, let's talk about some of the more advanced settings that you might want to change in order to change how your models print. I'm going to go back to my prepare, and for this I'm going to get a different model. I'm going to go back to printables in order to do that. And at printables I'm going to find a stitch from the a little character to find here. I'm going to use this one by SZ Balasas. And that's the one that I'll be using because it's going to give us a couple of errors that we'll want to talk about. I'll go ahead and click download, and that'll take me to my little stitch2.stl, and I'll hit download. Now that it's downloaded, I'll go ahead and open it just like I did before. I'm going to click the add button, and it's going to take me to Stitch 2. Now I do have 2 because I was working on this yesterday as well, and it's the same model, so it doesn't actually matter. Loading file, Stitch 2. Nice, I've got this one. Notice this one is a bit more complicated in that it has a lot more curves, and that's why we'll see that it takes a little bit longer to load in some cases. I'm going to click the number 4 on my keyboard, and that's going to take it to a blue color because I've told it that the number 4 slot on my P1S is blue, at least it is right now. If I'm taking a look at it, I'm like, all right, cool. Let's go ahead and slice it. If I push my slice plate, I am going to notice something though. I get this big warning. It seems object stitch 2 has floating regions. Please reorient the object or enable support generation. Ooh, that is a worry that it has. Now, if I take a look at the slicing of this file, notice that I have some of this blue layer, not the purple layer that's at the very bottom. Purple is like the very first bottom surface. So that's good, that's where it sticks to the plate. This blue is called an overhang wall. And an overhang means that the printer is printing too far out into space and it's worried that the plastic might not stick and it might fail. And the way that we typically solve that for 3D printing is by using supports. Remember, a 3D printer can't print plastic like in the middle of nowhere. The plastic always has to attach to something that's below it, whether that's the build plate or a previously extruded piece of plastic. So when this stitch is printing, if I drag it all the way down to the bottom, as it builds itself up through these spaces, it's telling me that there's a couple of warning spots right here on the chin that the overhang is a lot more than it thinks is possible. And I might get some errors related to that. It also said there was some like on the bottom of the nose. And to fix that, I can go ahead and enable supports. I'm going to go back to my Prepare tab. I'm going to go over to Supports. And then I'm going to click Enable Support. Nice. My model doesn't actually change. What will only change is what the slicer will see. If I click Slice, take a look at what happened here. Ooh, well first my stitch is missing its head. That's not good. I'll drag this up. But now it almost looks like my stitch is like sitting in the middle of a little skyline. And the reason is it's built a whole bunch of these little supports all around the stitch to make sure that everything that gets printed will be supported as to the best of its ability. Now, these overhangs are not really that bad on this model, so we're going to say we only want a little bit of support just on the chin of stitch to make sure there's not any issues with the texture. So I'm going to go back to my Prepare, and this time I'm going to use the Paint Supports. And this way I'm going to say, I want to use supports, but I only want to use supports in one specific place. So I'm going to click this support painting up here on the top of my little toolbar. When I do that, my model color all goes away, and I have a different kind of view of Stitch. Now I need to look at Stitch underneath here. I'm going to use the pan function and kind of drag the camera around. I'm going to say the only spot that I really want it is right here on the chin. So I'm going to make sure I have my little circle picked. I can change my pen sign or whatever I'd like. And I'm going to kind of color in this spot right here on Stitch's chin. And that's the only spot that I would really like to have supports. So then I'm going to click out my supports painting, go back to my regular model. Looks the same, but that's okay. Remember, I haven't actually sliced it yet. I'm going to click the slice plate. And now, oops, well, I forgot one more thing. If I go back to prepare, over here in my support type, I can click normal automatic. That's where it just does its own self. Or I can say normal manual. I'm going to change it to normal manual. And when I do that, it's going to use what I've predefined as my support location. So notice now, only that chin is supported if that's the area that I think is going to be needed. Now, of course, this is a model by model basics. And if you ask, well, when do I use supports and when don't I? How do I know? Well, you kind of have to try a bunch of stuff, and you have to let stuff fail and see what happens, and that way you will kind of get a better sense for it. Remember, this is only like 7 grams of plastic, and each spool has 1,000 grams. So this is 0.7% of one of the spools, and the plastic goes a long way unless you're printing like very large things. So I really would not worry about it too much. Cool, now I'm ready to go. That's how I've changed my supports. Let's talk about one more specific thing that I'd like to do. One very awesome ability that these Bambu P1S printers have is to print multicolor. I'm going to show you how to do that, but I'm also going to give you a couple of big warnings into why we have to be very mindful about printing in multicolor. Okay, if this is the stitch that I have my blue stitch, but I'd really like my blue stitch to have red eyes. Maybe I'm making a little demon stitch or something. Or maybe that's the color of Stitch's eyes. I actually don't remember. To do that, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to choose my color painting tool, or I can push N on the keyboard. For that, it kind of brings me back to a spot that looks similar to the support painting tool. And this time I'm going to say I really would like the eyes to be red. Now I can use my little paint that I did before with the circle tool, but instead I'm going to change my tool type over to fill, and I'm going to say I'd like that to be red. And what's going to happen now is Bambu Studio is actually going to do its best to find different areas based off of the drawings that I can do. So if I click my little stitch eyes right here, I've got a nice little stitch going on with some very cool space. I've got my little demon stitch ready to go. Now if I click and close out of my color painting, I can also use the circle one to kind of paint in different spots if I want it, but it's kind of hard to get it exactly how you want it. So I usually like to use the fill pattern and let Bambu Studio kind of define spaces for me. Use the fill. Lots of times I can see it when it's kind of opening and making guesses. It doesn't seem to be wanting to do that today for me. But it did click on the eyes and let me do that correctly. I'm going to close out of my color painting tab, and now I'm like, sweet, I'm ready to print my my little stitch here. But wait, why is there this big block of stuff over here? And I want to delete that, but when I click on it and push delete, it won't let me delete it. Well, the reason is this is called a waste tower. And the way that our Bambu P1S prints multicolored materials is whenever it does a switch color, it needs to purge out the previous material to make sure that there's no more red in the nozzle. So when it goes from blue to red, it has to squeeze out a bunch of filament and then it ejects that as waste. It also wants to make sure that it's printing correctly, otherwise you'll get a bleed effect in your model. So every time it needs to switch, it'll go over to the waste tower and it'll print a couple of lines to make sure that the color is coming out correctly. Then it'll go back to your model, print the other color, and then it has to switch back. This turns into a lot of wasted filament when we're making color changes. Now there are some ways to mitigate this. For example, if I want one of these little demon stitches, I have to have one waste tower. But if I click on my stitch and I clone him, and I'm going to have 2 of them, well, I still actually only need one waste tower, and I still have the same number of filament changes. So a good way to save plastic if you are trying to print a lot of multicolored things is to print them all at once. So if I clone them 4 more times, I'll be able to fill my build plate with a lot more of these stitches, but my total number of waste stays the same. I'll go ahead and get me very back to 1, and I'll kind of show you what I mean. I'm going to go over here, I'm going to push arrange for both so that my stitch goes to the middle and I've got my little waste tower over here. I'm going to go over to slice. Oh, it's still worried about floating regions. I can pretty much ignore that for now. This model doesn't actually need supports, it's just really close to needing them. All right, my color scheme, ooh, it shows me the red eyes and the blue. I'm gonna go back to line type, just so it'll kind of help me see a little bit. But down here, what I'm looking for, ooh, actually, nope, I'm on filament, I'm not gonna go back. I can see how much of each filament I'm using. For the red filament, I'm only using 0.14 grams for the eyes, but I'm using almost 7 grams that are flushed and almost another gram in the tower. So I'm using 8 grams total, but only 0.14 actually going into the model. That is a whole lot of waste. Similar to what happens when I look to the blue filament. My model's using 6.6 grams, it's flushing 4.61, and it's putting 5.9 in the tower. So it's using almost as much plastic in the tower as it is for the actual model that I'm making. And if I look down here at the totals, I'm using a total of 25 grams, but I'm only using about 7 for my model. So that is like a quarter of the filament is used for the model, and 75% of it, or 3/4, is all just being wasted. That is not great. However, sometimes you really need it in a multicolor model, or you want to mitigate it in other ways. I'll share a link to this whole idea of wasted filament and ways to save it from one of my favorite 3D printing YouTubers, and you can check out his work, and I think he'll better explain the ways to lower the amount of waste filament and other cool ideas to use when you are wanting to print multicolor. All right, I'm going to go ahead and delete my stitch back to my empty build plate, and that's most of what I wanted to talk to you today. I'll do a little bit of general stuff. Let me go grab my Calicat again. If I go through the menu options real quick, this one says add. It lets me add any of my models. This one lets me add plates. I may have already sliced a complete plate, or someone can share a plate they've sliced. I can add an entire plate that way. This third one says auto orient. I'll click on it on my cat, and it's actually going to put the model down with the largest flat side touching the bottom. That's why I chose this side, because there's actually more flat side here on the cat than there is on the very bottom. There will be an issue with printing this little tail though, so I'm going to rotate my model back. To rotate, I'm going to click this one, or I can push R on the keyboard, and I can rotate my model to an infinite number of degrees on the outside, which is actually a little bit too many, or I can keep my mouse on the inside of the circle, and it will kind of rotate in 45-degree increments. Perfect. I'll pop my cat back, and it'll also make sure that the feet are flat back on the build plate, which is nice. This one is arrange all objects. We've already talked about that. I can change what the spacing looks like. I can set it to be auto spacing, or I can make them closer or farther apart. I can auto rotate each of the objects if I'd like. I usually don't, and I'll just leave it basically like that. And I can push arrange. Now I've put it right in the middle because that's where it thinks it's going to be best. This one is variable layer height. This is a setting I can choose if I'd like, and what that will do is it will change the thickness of the layers depending on how much detail is in your model. This can be very useful when you're trying to print round things like spheres, because where it gets most round, it'll actually struggle the most, especially on the top and bottom of your round shape, and it won't be very round. Sometimes it can be like very like sharp corners. You can try that. I actually don't use it very often because I don't print a lot of like perfectly round things like this. The next one is called move. I can just use this by also clicking on it, so I don't often find it from here, but it will also tell me the positions in real space if I'd like to as well. I can use rotate. We talked about that already. We can use scale. I talked about that already. In this case, though, I can change the scale for everything. If I click one of them, I can change it to 200%. Though, if I want to turn off uniform scale, I can set the other ones back to 100. Now I have a very skinny little cat, and I can change my Z to 100 as well. This time now I just have like a little short and squat cat, which might be what I'm going for, or maybe I need to change one of the models in a specific direction in order for me to make it work. I'm going to set them all back to 100 and turn uniform scale back on so I don't forget later. Lay on face, I can click that. If I do, it's going to ask me which face of my object do I want to lay it on. It looks like it's kind of wrapped up in a little spider web. I could, of course, lay it on this little tail. This would not be a good way to print the cat, though, because we usually want to have a nice big surface for the piece to adhere to for the bed. So I'm going to instead go back to auto orient. It's going to put it on the side again, and that's going to let me go back to my rotation and kind of set the cat back up to its feet for my printing purposes. This next one here is cut. I can actually cut my model. If I say I only want part of it, I can define a layer here that I'd like to cut this object into two, and then I can take those two separate objects and print them separately or delete one of them if I want to. This might be nice because I might want to be able to do some very basic CAD changes to a model. Now, CAD stands for Computer Aided Design, and this is where I'd be usually using like a Fusion 360 or a Tinkercad or even a Shapeways in order to build my model. I can only do very rudimentary CAD alterations of the model within Bambu Studio. Bambu Studio is primarily a slicer and not a CAD program. So I'm going to close that out. I'm not going to do any cuts on my object today. I can do my support painting. We've already talked about that. Lots of different styles that we can use as well. I can also do seam painting. Every 3D printed part will always have a seam somewhere in the model. The reason is every time the printer prints a layer, it has to go up a layer somewhere. And as it goes up like that, it will leave behind a little bit of plastic, and it'll leave like a little bit of bubbles. It's impossible to get it completely gone, but the printers are very good at hiding those seams from different areas so that you won't see it. Sometimes, though, you have to define a certain space for that seam to go. I was printing like a collapsible sword once, and if the seam was in the wrong area, it would actually affect how the pieces move together. So that was the only case I've ever had to paint a seam. For the most part, you don't really need to use it. You can always make some text shapes if you want to put some text in and add it onto a shape. This goes back to using it as a basic CAD design program. You can also use color painting. We've talked about this already. Usually we can fill in different areas or paint things using the different styles. This height range is a good way to do some color changes that will actually save you a lot of plastic. And we also have our measure. This measure is nice if I want to know how big certain things are, or if I want to know like what is the distance between these two pieces. I can say, how wide is the cat? Oh, it's 20 millimeters. How tall is the cat? What is the angle of different areas? And it's usually pretty good about guessing whatever it is that you actually would like to do from that. If I go from here to here, that's going to tell me 90 degrees. Lots of cool places to explore in the measuring. And lastly, I also have this little assembly view at the very end. This will take me to a more detailed look into every single object. If in case I want to see exactly how the pieces are going to fit together, what color they are, or I want to see more details than I could before. Perfect. That's kind of all the basic tools. I encourage you to do some exploring, to try out some new ways to print, try out until things don't work, then go back and fix them and try a new way. There's lots of cool things to do for 3D printing, and there's a lot of fun models that you can print. This is Dan Redding at 2-Bit Circus Foundation, and I hope you have a great time 3D printing. Reach out to me and 2-Bit Circus Foundation if you have any questions or concerns. Bye for now.